Elena never thought much about time. She had always lived in the present, believing there would always be more tomorrows, more opportunities to love, to laugh, to hold Ryan's hand just a little longer. But time had its own cruel way of reminding people that nothing was infinite. It started with exhaustion, subtle at first, a lingering tiredness she couldn't quite shake off. Then came the dizziness, the pounding headaches, the bruises appearing too easily on her skin. She brushed it off, blaming work stress, late-night movies with Ryan, skipped breakfasts. But when she collapsed in the middle of a grocery store one afternoon, she knew something was wrong. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and something too clean, too sterile. The cold, white walls pressed in on her as she sat on the examination table, waiting for the doctor to return. Her heart pounded with nervous anticipation, but she still clung to the hope that it was nothing serious. Maybe anemia, maybe fatigue, something easily fixed. Then the doctor walked in, his face carefully composed, his eyes carrying the weight of something heavier than she was prepared for. "Miss Elena Carter, we received your test results." His voice was gentle, but she could already hear the unspoken words beneath it. "It's leukemia, a rare, aggressive form." Leukemia. The word echoed in her mind, a foreign concept that didn't belong to her, didn't fit into her life. She stared at the doctor, waiting for him to say something else, waiting for him to take it back. "We can try treatments, but at this stage, it's difficult to say how effective they will be," he continued. "You may have months, maybe a year at best." Her world tilted, the floor vanishing beneath her feet. Months? A year? That wasn't enough. That wasn't nearly enough time to do everything she had planned, to spend forever with Ryan the way they always talked about. Ryan. Her fingers curled into fists as his face flooded her mind, his easy smile, the warmth in his eyes whenever he looked at her, the way he kissed her forehead when she fell asleep beside him on the couch. How could she tell him? How could she let him watch her fade away, helpless to stop it? She thought of her mother, who had spent years caring for her father through his illness, slowly watching the love of her life slip away, powerless to do anything. She had seen the way grief hollowed her out, the way it stole the light from her eyes. Elena couldn't do that to Ryan. She wouldn't. That night, as she walked home from the hospital, the decision formed in her mind with terrifying clarity. She would break his heart before her sickness could. She would make him hate her, make him let go. So when she was gone, he wouldn't spend years mourning her, trapped in the memory of what they once were. She would set him free, no matter how much it destroyed her in the process. Ryan's laughter filled their small apartment, rich and carefree. He was standing by the kitchen, flipping pancakes, his messy hair falling into his eyes. It was a lazy Sunday morning, one of their favorite days, when time seemed to slow and they could exist in their own little world. Elena watched him from the doorway, her heart aching with the knowledge that this would be the last Sunday morning like this. She forced a smile, but it felt wrong on her face, foreign. "What?" Ryan grinned, noticing her staring. "You look like you have something to say." Her throat tightened. If only he knew. She forced herself to turn away, to busy herself with the coffee mugs on the counter. She had rehearsed this in her mind 100 times since last night. "Ryan, we need to talk." Her voice came out colder than she intended, and she hated herself for it. He frowned, setting the spatula down. "Okay, that sounds serious." She inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "I think we should break up." The words felt like shards of glass in her throat. Silence filled the air, stretching unbearably between them. Ryan's smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait, what?" He let out a small, breathless laugh, as if he thought she was joking. But when he saw the expression on her face, his laughter died. "Elena, what are you saying?" She turned to face him, her mask in place, her heart breaking with every breath. "I don't love you anymore." The words felt like poison. Ryan took a step forward, his brows drawn together. "That's not funny, Elena." "It's not a joke." She forced herself to look him in the eye. "I've been thinking about this for a while. I don't think we're right for each other anymore." She saw it then. The moment the pain struck, the hurt flashing in his dark brown eyes. That doesn't make any sense. Yesterday you were fine. We were fine. She swallowed hard. I've outgrown us, Ryan. I want something different. His jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. Different? We've been together for 6 years, Elena. You don't just wake up one day and decide you don't love someone. She wanted to scream that she didn't, that she loved him more than anything, that she was doing this for him. But instead, she steeled herself and whispered, I'm sorry. Ryan shook his head, his expression unreadable. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, If you're leaving me, give me one last chance to change your mind. Her breath hitched. Ryan. 1 month. He cut her off, stepping closer, his eyes burning with determination. Give me 1 month to remind you why we love each other. If, after that, you still want to walk away, I won't stop you. She should have said no. She should have pushed him away completely. But instead, she heard herself whisper, 1 month. And just like that, she had sealed both of their fates. Elena had thought that agreeing to Ryan's challenge would make things easier. That if she gave him 1 last month, she could make him believe their love had faded, and he would walk away when the time came. But she had underestimated him. Ryan was not the kind of man who gave up on love. And he certainly wasn't the kind of man who would let go of her without a fight. The first day of their 1-month deal, he woke up earlier than usual, moving around their apartment with an unusual energy. When she walked out of the bedroom, her hair still messy from sleep, she found him standing in the kitchen with a plate of French toast and a cup of her favorite coffee. Morning, sweetheart. He grinned, setting the plate in front of her. She hesitated. This wasn't how breakups were supposed to go. He was supposed to be angry, distant. But instead, he was acting like nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just told him she didn't love him anymore. Ryan, she sighed. You don't have to do this. Do what? He raised an eyebrow. Make breakfast for my girlfriend? I'm not your. She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. He smirked, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. We still have a month. And in that time, you're still mine. She shook her head, frustrated, but sat down anyway. The moment she took a bite, warmth spread through her chest. He had made it exactly how she liked it, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, with just the right amount of cinnamon. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Because no matter how hard she tried to push him away, Ryan knew her. He knew her better than anyone else. And that was what made all of this so much harder. Day 3. Old memories. By the 3rd day, Ryan had already begun his plan to remind her of everything they had built together. Put on something nice. We're going out. Elena had been curled up on the couch, trying to make herself as uninteresting as possible, but Ryan wasn't giving her that option. Where? She asked warily. You'll see. She wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell him that spending more time together would only make things harder. But she had agreed to his challenge, and Ryan was nothing if not stubborn. So she sighed and got dressed. An hour later, they were standing in front of a small, cozy cafe, the very first place they had ever met. Elena's heart clenched. She remembered that day so clearly. How she had been late for an interview and spilled coffee all over Ryan when she bumped into him. How he had laughed instead of getting angry, offering to buy her another drink instead. How they had spent hours talking, as if they had known each other forever. You remember this place? Ryan asked, watching her closely. Of course I do, she admitted. Then let's relive it. He gestured toward the entrance. Come on. I promise not to spill coffee on you this time. Despite herself, she laughed. And that was the beginning of her undoing. Day 10. Cracks in the mask. Ryan was relentless. Every day, he did something to make her remember, to make her feel. From surprise midnight drives to their favorite lookout point, to bringing home her favorite flowers, to simply holding her close when she pretended to be asleep. She tried to resist, tried to remind herself that this was temporary, that it was all an illusion. But her heart didn't listen. One night, as they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Ryan turned to her. Do you ever wonder what our future would have looked like? He asked softly. Elena's fingers tightened around the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Ryan. Just humor me, he said. She hesitated, but then sighed. I don't know. Maybe we would have gotten married. Bought a house. Had kids, maybe. His lips curled into a small smile. You always wanted a place with a big garden. She swallowed hard.
Yeah.
And a dog. And a dog, she whispered. Ryan reached over and gently took her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady. We could still have that, Elena. You just have to let me in. She pulled her hand away, her heart aching. Ryan, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Good, he said simply. Because loving you has never been easy. It's been messy and stubborn and imperfect. And I don't want easy, Elena. I just want you. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. Ryan, please don't do this. Then tell me you don't love me. His voice was barely a whisper. Look me in the eyes and say it, and I'll stop. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come.
Because it was a lie. And he knew it.
Ryan let out a slow breath, his gaze soft but determined. One last chance, Elena. That's all I'm asking for. She closed her eyes, feeling her resolve cracking. A month had never felt so long, or so heartbreakingly short. End of Chapter 3. Elena had always thought she was good at hiding things. She had spent years mastering the art of a forced smile, of laughing at the right moments, of swallowing the pain that clawed at her insides. But Ryan was not someone she could fool so easily. And the longer their one-month deal stretched on, the more dangerous it became. Day 15. A night of unspoken truths. Elena woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the bedside lamp, casting warm shadows across the walls. She turned her head slightly, and there he was. Ryan. Fast asleep, his breathing steady, his face peaceful in a way that made her chest tighten painfully.
She shouldn't be here.
She shouldn't still be doing this. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Reaching out hesitantly, her fingers brushed against his cheek. Just for a moment. Just to memorize the way he felt before she had to walk away forever. But the moment her skin made contact, his eyes fluttered open. Elena? His voice was thick with sleep, laced with confusion. She froze, pulling her hand back as if burned. Go back to sleep. But Ryan didn't listen. He never did. Instead, he reached out and wrapped his fingers around her wrist, his touch gentle but unyielding. Are you going to keep pretending, Elena? He asked quietly. Her throat tightened. Pretending what? That you don't love me anymore. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She forced herself to hold his gaze, to lie like she had been doing for weeks now. Ryan, Stop. His voice was firm, but not angry. Just stop, Elena. You can push me away all you want, but I know you. And I know when you're lying. Her entire body went rigid. You don't know anything. Don't I? His fingers tightened slightly around her wrist. Then why are you still here? She sucked in a sharp breath. Because she was selfish. Because she wasn't ready to say goodbye. Because she wanted to hold on to him, just a little longer. Go to sleep, Ryan, she whispered, pulling away from his grasp. His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving hers.
Fine.
But I won't stop, Elena. Not until you give me a real reason to let you go. She turned away, pressing her lips together. She already had a reason. She just couldn't bear to tell him. Day 18. The unexpected visit. Ryan had always been persistent, but now he was becoming relentless. Elena had spent the last 3 days avoiding his gaze, avoiding deep conversations, avoiding the way he made her heart ache with every little thing he did. And then, just when she thought she had built enough distance, fate decided to be cruel. She had just returned home from the hospital, her test results clutched tightly in her hand, hidden deep inside her bag, when she found Ryan standing in the kitchen, talking to someone she never expected to see. Her doctor. Dr. Lillian Carter. Panic shot through her veins like ice. Elena, the doctor greeted, looking relieved. I hope I'm not intruding. Your husband. Boyfriend. Elena corrected automatically. Lillian smiled gently. My apologies. Your boyfriend reached out to my clinic, asking about your health records. Since you listed him as your emergency contact, I thought. Elena's blood ran cold. Ryan, she whispered, turning to him. What did you do? He crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. You've been hiding something from me. I needed answers. Her breathing turned shallow. You had no right. No right? His voice rose slightly, raw with emotion. Elena, you've been acting strange for weeks. You barely eat, you lose yourself in thoughts, and you flinch every time I try to talk about the future. And then you try to break up with me out of nowhere? You think I would notice? She swallowed hard. You think I wouldn't fight for you? He continued, his voice breaking. Her chest ached so badly, she could barely stand it. Elena, Lillian interrupted softly. I didn't tell him anything, but I do think you should. Silence stretched between them. Ryan's gaze was piercing, his hands clenched into fists, as if bracing himself for the worst. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, telling herself that she was doing the right thing, that this was for his sake. But as she looked at the man who had loved her unconditionally for so many years, the words caught in her throat. Elena, he whispered, stepping closer. What are you hiding from me? Her fingers trembled. And finally, her walls began to crack. I'm sick, Ryan, she breathed. I'm dying. The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating. Ryan didn't move, didn't blink. For the first time since she had met him, he looked utterly lost. What? His voice was barely audible. She forced herself to look him in the eyes. I have cancer, and it's terminal. Silence. A silence, so deep it felt like the entire world had stopped. Then, Ryan took a step back, as if the weight of her words had physically pushed him away.
No.
He shook his head, his breath uneven.
No.
You're lying. I'm not. No. His voice cracked, raw and desperate. You said you didn't love me anymore. You said you wanted to leave me. You. His voice broke completely, and he pressed a hand to his face, trying to steady himself. And Elena felt like she was shattering into a million pieces. I didn't want you to suffer, she whispered. I didn't want you to watch me fade away. I thought if I broke your heart first, it would be easier. Easier? Ryan dropped his hand, his eyes blazing. Easier for who? Tears slipped down her cheeks. Ryan. You don't get to decide that, Elena, he choked out. You don't get to decide how I love you. Her heart twisted painfully. I just wanted you to move on, she whispered. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I don't want to move on. I want you. The weight of his words hit her like a storm. Ryan.
No.
His voice was quieter now, but no less fierce. I don't care how much time we have left. Whether it's years or months or days, I'm staying. I'm not letting you go. Her chest tightened. She had spent all this time trying to protect him. But maybe, just maybe, Ryan had been protecting her all along. And for the first time since she had been diagnosed, she let herself hope. Hope that love, real, messy, stubborn love, was worth holding on to, no matter how much time they had left. Ryan had always been Elena's safe place, her steady ground, the person she could run to when the world became too much. But now, she had turned him into the one suffering. He hadn't spoken much after she told him the truth. He just stood there, looking at her as if she were slipping through his fingers, as if he didn't know how to hold on. And it broke her. Ryan had never been a man who begged.
He never had to.
But the way his eyes searched hers that night, desperate and shattered, made her want to take it all back. She wanted to be selfish. She wanted to believe in a miracle. But instead, she had only given him pain. The next morning, she found him in the kitchen. He was making coffee, but his hands were trembling. She hesitated in the doorway, watching as he placed 2 cups on the counter. One black, one with cream and sugar, just the way she liked it. A small, painful smile tugged at her lips. Even now, he remembers. Ryan. He didn't turn around. Are you hungry? His voice was hoarse, like he had spent the whole night awake. She swallowed.
No.
A heavy silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, he turned. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark with something she couldn't name. So what now? He asked. Her breath caught. Ryan. You plan to leave me. His voice was quiet, but every word was a blade to her chest. Even knowing you're sick, you still wanted to leave me. Tears burned in her eyes. I wanted to protect you. Protect me? He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. You think I'd be better off without you? That I'd just forget you? She opened her mouth, but no words came. Because she knew the truth. Ryan wouldn't move on. Not easily. Not without breaking. And that was what she feared the most. I don't want you to spend the rest of your life watching me get weaker, Ryan. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life regretting that I didn't fight for you, he shot back. Her breath hitched. You don't get to choose for me, Elena. If I'm going to hurt, let me hurt with you. She squeezed her eyes shut, a sob threatening to break free. I don't want you to see me die. Ryan stepped forward, his voice breaking. Then let me love you while you're still here. Her walls crumbled. And before she knew it, she was in his arms, her fingers clutching onto his shirt, her body trembling with silent cries. Ryan held her as if he could shield her from the inevitable, as if he could love her enough to erase the cruel fate hanging over her. But they both knew love wasn't enough to stop time. It could only make the moments they had left worth living. Day 21. A love that won't let go. Ryan had always been stubborn. So when Elena tried to distance herself again, he refused to let her. She woke up the next morning to find him sitting at the foot of her bed, looking at her with quiet determination. What are you doing? She asked groggily. Watching you. She blinked. That's creepy. Don't care. He shrugged. I have limited time to stare at you. Let me enjoy it. She let out a shaky laugh, covering her face with a pillow. Ryan. Sho, he interrupted. I made a decision. She lowered the pillow, wary. What decision? We're making a bucket list. She frowned. A what? A list of everything you want to do before you know. His voice faltered slightly, but he pushed forward. And we're going to do them together. Elena stared at him. Ryan, Don't argue, he cut in. If you tell me no, I'm going to do them anyway and drag you along. She let out a soft breath. You're impossible. And you're stuck with me. A small smile tugged at her lips. Maybe she couldn't change the ending. But maybe, just maybe, she could make the journey worth it. And Ryan? He would make sure of it. Even if it broke him in the end. Day 23. The first adventure. Elena had never been the type to make big plans. The thought of her bucket list had always seemed like something for people who were prepared for the end. And yet, here she was, standing on a cliff with Ryan beside her, watching the sun dip low into the horizon. Isn't it beautiful? Ryan's voice was low, almost reverent. Elena could barely bring herself to look at the view. The sunset was stunning, yes, but she was too focused on the man beside her, the man who had made her feel like she still had time, even when the clock was ticking down. It is, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But I'm not sure if it's worth it without you. Ryan turned to her then, his eyes soft, his smile gentle. You don't get it, do you? Elena frowned.
What?
I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever. The time we have, the moments we make, they're worth more than a lifetime without love. She swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. Ryan, you're asking for something impossible. Impossible? I'm asking for you, Elena. And if that's impossible, then I'll fight every damn second to make it real. Her heart clenched. You don't have to do this. But I want to. He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. You're my world, Elena. And as long as you're here, I'm going to make every moment count. She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch, the strength of his promise. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe they could do this. Day 25, the concert. Elena had never been much for big crowds. She liked small, intimate moments. But when Ryan had insisted on taking her to a live concert, a dream from her past, she hadn't been able to refuse. There was something magical about the music, the way it pulsed through the crowd, the way Ryan held her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. They stood there, together, in the midst of the chaos, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt normal. "I never thought I'd be at one of these," she murmured, watching the lights flash above the stage. Ryan chuckled softly. "I never thought you'd be the type to enjoy a rock concert." "I'm not," she replied with a teasing smile. "But for you, I'll do anything." He squeezed her hand, his gaze soft. "You've already done more than I ever imagined." Elena's smile faltered, and she turned away, focusing on the band, as if the music could drown out the heartache. But Ryan wasn't done. "Elena, we're going to make the most of this. I promise." She turned back to him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to drag you into my mess." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this, and I choose you." His voice was steady, unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." The music blared around them, but all Elena could hear was his promise. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel it, to feel like she wasn't alone. Day 28. A quiet moment. The list was far from complete, but Elena didn't care. The real moments weren't about the adventures or the items checked off. They were in the quiet, intimate times, the stolen seconds where they were just them. Tonight, they sat on the porch, the night air cool against their skin. The stars were brighter than she had ever seen them, and the world felt still, like time had stopped just for them. Ryan leaned his head against hers, both of them wrapped in a blanket. "Do you ever think about the future?" Elena smiled faintly. "I try not to." "Why?" She sighed, pulling her knees to her chest. "Because the future isn't something I can control. I want to live in the now. I want to be with you in these moments." Ryan's fingers brushed against hers, entwining them. "I think about the future all the time." She turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. "You do?" "I do." His eyes were serious now, filled with a depth that made her stomach tighten. "But I don't think about it in the way you think. I think about how I'll never stop loving you, how I'll never stop fighting for us. Even when you're gone, Elena, you'll still be with me." She blinked rapidly, trying to stop the tears from falling. "Ryan." "No," he interrupted, shaking his head. "I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because it's the truth. You're a part of me, Elena. And no matter what happens, that will never change." Her chest tightened painfully, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to cry. Not for the pain, but for the love they shared. She wasn't alone. Ryan would carry her with him, and that, somehow, made everything bearable. Day 30. The dance in the rain. The storm rolled in late that afternoon, dark clouds stretching across the sky. The scent of rain clung to the air, thick and heavy with the promise of a downpour. Elena stood by the window, watching as the first droplets hit the ground. "You're staring." She turned to see Ryan leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, a playful smirk on his lips. "It's just rain," she murmured. "And you look like you want to run into it." She let out a small laugh. "Maybe I do." Ryan's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Then what are we waiting for?" Before she could protest, he grabbed her hand and pulled her outside. The rain was cool against her skin, soaking through her clothes instantly, but she didn't care. Ryan twirled her, his laughter blending with the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement. "You're insane," she giggled, breathless. "And you love me for it," he shot back.
She did. God, she did.
She tilted her head up, watching the sky, feeling the weight of the moment. "This is what I'll remember," she whispered. Ryan stilled, his expression softening. "Then let's make it last forever." And as he pulled her into a kiss, deep and desperate, Elena let herself believe that, somehow, this moment truly would. Day 33. A secret wish. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Ryan said one evening as they lay on the couch, tangled together. Elena hesitated, biting her lip. "Anything. Anything." She took a deep breath. I used to dream about what our future would be like. Ryan's fingers stilled against her back. Yeah. She nodded, keeping her gaze on the ceiling. I imagined us in a little house by the ocean, waking up to the sound of waves, having breakfast on the porch, maybe even a family. Ryan sucked in a sharp breath. She turned to him, forcing a small smile. It was stupid. No, he said quickly, his grip tightening around her. It wasn't. She studied him, the warmth in his gaze making her heart ache. Ryan, you deserve that future, with someone who can give it to you. His jaw clenched. Stop. But stop acting like you don't belong in that dream, Elena. His voice was hoarse. You're my future. No matter how much time we have, you're it. Her eyes burned with tears, but she didn't argue, because deep down, she wanted to believe him. Day 37. The midnight wedding. Ryan had always been unpredictable, so she shouldn't have been surprised when, one night, he pulled her out of bed and led her to the backyard, where fairy lights twinkled like stars. A small table was set up with candles and flowers, and standing in the middle of it all was a man in a suit and officiant. Elena's heart stopped. Ryan. He turned to her, his expression soft but determined. Marry me. Tears filled her eyes. You're crazy. Yeah, he admitted, stepping closer. Crazy about you. Her breath hitched. You don't have to do this. But I want to.
His voice was steady.
I don't care how much time we have. I want to be your husband, even if it's only for a day. Her walls crumbled. Okay, she whispered. And in the stillness of the night, under the glow of fairy lights, with no witnesses except the stars, Elena became Ryan's wife. And for that moment, time stood still. Day 40, the first goodbye. The world had never felt so fragile. Elena sat on the hospital bed, staring out of the window, watching as life continued beyond the glass. People walked by, laughing, living. For them, time was endless. For her, it was slipping away. Ryan sat beside her, his fingers tangled with hers, as if holding on tighter would somehow keep her here longer. You should go home, she murmured, breaking the silence. Ryan turned to her, his eyes dark with exhaustion. I'm not leaving. Ryan. Don't. His voice was quiet, but firm. Don't ask me to leave you. She closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. I just don't want you to see me like this. He gently tilted her face toward him. I want to see you every way. In every moment. Because I love you, Elena. And I don't care if it hurts. Her heart ached. I don't want to be your pain. You're my everything, he whispered. Don't take that away from me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She had wanted to protect him from this, but maybe, just maybe, he was protecting her, too. Day 43. The dance in the living room. They had been released from the hospital for now, but Elena knew it wouldn't last. Tonight, the house was quiet, the only sound coming from an old record player Ryan had set up in the living room. A soft melody filled the space, slow and sweet. Ryan held out his hand. Dance with me. Elena hesitated. I'm too tired. Then I'll hold you up. Her breath caught. Slowly, she took his hand, letting him pull her close. They swayed gently, her head resting against his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. You know what's funny? She murmured. What? I used to think love was about the big moments, the grand gestures, but it's not. She closed her eyes, savoring the warmth of his embrace. It's this. It's you holding me up when I can't stand on my own. Ryan pressed a kiss to her hair. Always, Elena. And in that moment, wrapped in his arms, she let herself believe that love was enough. Even if time wasn't. Day 46, the promise. Elena's body was growing weaker. Ryan could see it in the way she struggled to sit up, in the way she held onto furniture as she walked, in the way her breath hitched when she tried to laugh. But her eyes were still full of fire. She reached for his hand, squeezing it. Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone. She hesitated, then shook her head.
No, not gone.
When I'm not here, I want you to live. Ryan's throat tightened. Elena. Promise me, she interrupted, her voice breaking. I need to know that you'll be happy. That you'll find love again. His jaw clenched. I don't want anyone else. I didn't ask you to want it, she whispered. I asked you to promise me. He exhaled shakily, pressing their foreheads together. I promise I'll live, he murmured. It wasn't a promise to love again. But for now, it was enough. Day 50, the final adventure. Ryan had one last surprise. He carried her to the car, drove her to the cliffs where they had watched the sunset together weeks ago. Elena's breath caught. You remembered. Of course I did, Ryan whispered. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, pulling her close as they sat on the hood of the car, watching the sky fade from gold to deep indigo. Ryan. Yeah. I'm not scared anymore. His grip tightened around her.
Why?
She turned to him, eyes full of love. Because you loved me enough to make me forget. A tear slipped down his cheek. He kissed her softly, deeply, as if he could hold onto her forever. And for one final, perfect moment,
he did.
Day 55, the last morning. The sun had barely risen when Ryan woke to the sound of Elena's soft breathing beside him. He turned to her, watching the way her chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. She looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Elena, he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyelids fluttered open, a sleepy smile forming on her lips. Hey. Hey. He forced a smile, even as his chest ached. She reached for his hand, squeezing it weakly. Can we stay like this? Just a little longer? For as long as you want, he promised, pulling her closer. She sighed contentedly, her body relaxing against his. Ryan closed his eyes, memorizing everything, the warmth of her skin, the scent of her hair, the quiet sound of her breathing. Because deep down he knew, time was slipping away. Day 57. The goodbye they never wanted. Ryan sat beside Elena's hospital bed, his fingers tracing soft circles over the back of her hand. She was weaker now, her breathing shallow, but she still managed to smile when she saw him. You're here, she whispered. Always. His voice was hoarse. She studied him for a long moment. You look tired. You look beautiful. A soft laugh escaped her lips. Liar. Not a chance. Elena exhaled shakily. Ryan. Yeah. Thank you. His heart clenched. For what? For loving me, she murmured. For making every day feel like forever. Ryan swallowed the lump in his throat. Forever wouldn't be enough. Tears welled in her eyes. Promise me one more thing? Anything. When you miss me, don't be sad. Remember me like this. Happy. Loved. His vision blurred. I don't know how to live without you, Elena. She smiled softly. You already promised me that you would. Ryan let out a shaky breath, pressing his forehead against hers. I love you. Her fingers curled weakly around his. I love you too. And with one last, whispered breath, she was gone. Day 60. The world without her. The house felt unbearably quiet. Ryan stood in their bedroom, staring at the empty bed, his hands trembling. The air still smelled like her. Lavender and vanilla. She was everywhere. In the laughter that once filled these walls. In the photos on the nightstand. In the warmth of the blankets they used to share. And yet, she was nowhere. A sob racked through him as he sank to the floor, his chest aching with a grief so deep, he thought it might consume him. Come back. His voice broke. Please come back. But there was no answer. Just silence. Day 70. The letter she left behind. 10 days had passed, but time felt meaningless. Then, one evening, Ryan found an envelope tucked inside her favorite book. His name was written in her delicate handwriting. Hands shaking, he opened it. My love. If you're reading this, it means you kept your promise. You're still here. And for that, I am so proud of you. I know it hurts. I know it feels impossible. But you will find a way to keep going, because that's who you are, Ryan. You are love and strength and everything good in this world. You made my life beautiful. You gave me a love story, I never thought I'd have. And even though our time was short, it was enough. You were enough. So when the pain feels unbearable, remember this. You loved me well, and that love will never fade. Live, my love. For both of us. Forever yours. Elena. Tears blurred his vision as he clutched the letter to his chest. For the first time since she was gone, he allowed himself to breathe. Because even in death, she was still holding him up. Day 100. The first step forward. The world kept moving.
The seasons changed.
The leaves turned golden, then fell, only to be replaced by the soft buds of spring. But for Ryan, time had stopped the moment Elena took her last breath. For weeks, he existed in a fog, waking up only to go through the motions of a life that felt incomplete without her. But one morning, as the sun filtered through the curtains, something shifted inside him. He reached for the letter she had left behind, reading her words again. Live, my love. For both of us. His chest ached, but he knew she wouldn't want him to spend the rest of his days drowning in grief. So, for the first time in months, he stepped outside. Day 150, finding pieces of her everywhere. Healing wasn't a straight path. Some days, Ryan felt like he could breathe again. Other days, the grief crashed over him like a tidal wave, pulling him under. But he found her in the little things. In the laughter of a stranger on the street. In the scent of lavender at a cafe she used to love. In the way the sky turned gold at sunset, just like the day they shared their last adventure. Elena was gone, but she wasn't. She was in every beautiful moment, in every memory, in the love she left behind. And somehow, that made the pain a little easier to bear. Day 365. The 1-year anniversary. Ryan returned to the cliffs. The same place where they had watched the stars, where she had told him she wasn't afraid anymore. This time he wasn't here to say goodbye. He was here to tell her everything. Hey, Elena, he whispered, the wind carrying his words. I kept my promise. I lived. I still miss you every day, but I'm learning to smile again. To find happiness in the little things. Just like you wanted. He exhaled, feeling the weight on his heart slowly lift. I love you. As if in response, a soft breeze rustled through the trees, wrapping around him like a gentle embrace. And, in that moment, he knew she would always be with him. Years later, love after loss. Ryan never thought he'd love again. Not the way he loved Elena. But one day, life surprised him. It wasn't sudden, nor was it forced. It was quiet, like the warmth of the sun after a long winter. She was kind, patient. She never tried to replace Elena, only to stand beside him in the life he was learning to rebuild. The first time he smiled at her without sadness lingering in his eyes, he knew Elena would have wanted this. Because love wasn't about moving on. It was about carrying the past while embracing the future. And that's exactly what he did. For both of them.